According to Eurobarometer, 46% of Europeans have experienced an emotional or psychological problem in the past 12 months. More specifically, 25 million people in the EU suffer from anxiety disorders, and it's enough to match the combined population of Finland, Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. My name is Danilo, and this is the fourth episode of the YEPP Show.
I flirt very closely to burnout all the time.
My generation began to deal with anxiety.
We didn't know what to expect.
I'm like beginning to start sweating.
Christmas was cancelled because of me.
Okay, you ready?
Yes.
I'm joined today by my colleague Adriana Castellanos from YEPP
Hi everyone, very excited to be here.
and by Andres, press trainee in the EPP Group.
Hello, and thank you for inviting me.
It's a pleasure to have you here. You are both from Spain and I'm from Italy, so we are the Mediterranean's crew. Guys, we are ready to dive into the topic because today we speak about mental health, and we know that the COVID pandemic was a big game changer in this topic because after the COVID pandemic, symptoms such as anxiety and depression doubled in some EU countries. And I wanted to discuss with you how you dealt with mental health during COVID. I want to start with you, Andres. How did you live during the COVID pandemic, and how did you face mental health issues at the time?
I remember the COVID period as a very interesting and a very difficult period in my life. I was in my second year of university, and that is the year where everything begins for us. You begin to go outside, you can party more, you begin to have more responsibilities, and you're entering in the part of your university degree when you are more interested in. Also, it's a moment where we can begin to go to Erasmus, we can begin to do different things, and all from a sudden, all stopped. In Spain, it is true that we had a lot of signals, especially coming from Italy, that there was a pandemic, some sort of illness, that was creating a problem of health, but we didn't take care of the signals, and we had a very hard pandemic, at least 1.5 years of very hard restrictions.
Yep.
And going back to the beginning of the pandemic, I remember that the first thing that happened to us, to the university students, was that we have to manage to find a solution to continue with our degrees online, completely online. We were coming from a class like presential mood, and we had to go online one day from another. It is true that, for example, I live with another 5 people in Spain, with my father and my mother and other 3 brothers. So we had to manage in not a very big house to be all together, to have our time, to have our space, to continue with our life. In the topic of mental health, that it was one of the questions that you asked me, I remember it as a quite particular period. I think that a lot of people from my generation begin to deal with problems such as anxiety of not knowing what's going to happen tomorrow or how many deaths were going to be in the news, and also a lot of feeling of uncertainty of how was going to be the day of tomorrow in the personal topics. You don't know if you were going to be infected, maybe your father, maybe your mother, or maybe someone of your family who was going to do the groceries. So in my personal case, I remember it as a time of thinking about the idea of the anxiety that produces not knowing what is going to happen with you.
Yeah.
Also, I know that I was very lucky because I didn't lose any direct familiars during the first wave of the pandemic. But deal with the anxiety of not knowing what's going to happen tomorrow or maybe next week, I think that was the most hard part, the hardest part.
Yeah, I think that all of us can relate to that, especially you, Adriana, that you are also from Spain, but you were also coming back from the US at that time. So I want to know more about that.
Yeah, that's true. With 16 years old, I went to the US, and the year that I came back, it was a year where I have to completely adapt to everything because I also changed schools. So I had to make new friends. I had also to meet new professors, and everything that I studied in the US, I mean, it was not for nothing, but it didn't match all of the requirements. And at the end of the year, I was going to be tested on different things. So for me, that year, I remember I struggled a lot. And I will always remember, because the day that they announced the lockdown in Valencia, like in Spain in general, that morning I did my last exam of my second trimester. And I remember I was just commenting with my friends how everything went and everything. And then we went back home and we were supposed to do a huge party to celebrate the finals. And then my mom came and she told me that they announced that a lockdown had started. So it was quite difficult. I remember it was a period of a lot of uncertainty, and also people were very scared because we didn't know what to expect. So
Yeah, no party anymore.
no party.
I mean, it was not just about the parties, but I can relate to both your experience, because when you cannot go out and you cannot experience the social life, that changes everything. And one anecdote that I want to tell in my experience was that I was coming back from the Erasmus in 2021 after 4 months not seeing my family and my friends and so on, and I just wanted to see all of them and celebrate Christmas with them, and I got COVID that very moment.
Oh my
So
gosh.
Christmas was cancelled because of me, and all of my family could not celebrate, and I also didn't go to New Year's Eve, which was very frustrating, and I needed to spend all the week just studying alone in my room for the exams. But to wrap up our discussion, I want to introduce our guest of the day. Joining us from Ireland, she is a member of the European Parliament with the EPP, and she is a passionate advocate for mental health. Please welcome Maria Walsh. Hi, Maria.
Hi, thank you very, very much for having me.
How are you today?
I'm doing well. I mean, listening to the lived experiences of what now was 5 years ago is quite daunting, considering here in the institution of the European Parliament, myself and very like-minded colleagues that work on mental health, why not seen as a competency of the EU, but I mean, you see it in future politicians, in future academics, in farmers and so on. So we have to grapple with the realities of what COVID did, and even prior to COVID, the impact that mental health has on our constituents.
And just to give our listeners a bit of context, Maria was first elected in 2019 with Ireland's centre-right party Fine Gael, and is now serving for a second mandate in the parliament. Since her election, she's been a leading voice on mental health, and in 2024 she played a key role in launching the European Parliament's first ever intergroup on mental health, which is very interesting. Listening to our stories, do you think that in Ireland the situation with the COVID pandemic and mental health has been more or less the same?
Absolutely. And I would say just beyond even young activists or advocates like yourself, I think COVID played a detrimental role to a lot of lived experiences. You know, you all shared, you know, hanging out with friends, moving on to the next career step, partying or celebrating a final chapter of school. Like, there are big monumental professional moments that we all need. And when I visit schools now through the Blue Flag program or the European Ambassador Schools program, or even third level universities, when we talk about what the likes of the access to the single market looks like, I'm very conscious that there is a generation, if not generations, that were impacted from COVID, and then is down as far as eye contact, feeling comfortable in a room again. Like, that's a muscle that wasn't flexed for a long period of time. And I can say this as someone who ran for my first election in politics in 2019, 6 months later then being told stay away from people, and that reality of, well, my job is to be around people to advocate for them, and then being told, well, you only live on a screen, and listen, that was required to keep people safe and well, but there is an absolute impact, and from a mental health perspective, prior to COVID-19, it was reported 1 in every 6 suffered in the EU from a mental health challenge or issue. And I would only imagine, based off recent studies that we work with, that has expedited. The fact is, the second leading cause of death in our European Union right now for young people between the ages of 10 and 19 is death by suicide. So the work I do, conversations like this, it is paramount that we understand the lived experience of what COVID did, what it took away, and you have to grieve that. There is a period of bereft about that you close that chapter. I don't know, the Interrail opportunity, Erasmus Plus, going to the likes of America, how exciting that is, and then having to say, well, actually, that experience couldn't happen because of, and there's an understanding that needs to be recognized too.
Is there something that we learned about mental health or other parts of it that COVID taught us?
For sure. I mean, I think first and foremost, from EPP family side, I was talking about and working on mental health advocacy prior to even my 2019 first election, and then over the course of the first 5 years. And it was funny speaking with some EPP colleagues. They were like, is that more of a social policy issue? We don't discuss public health here. How does that fit within our regime of predominantly being economically focused? And what COVID gifted us, or certainly reminded us, is the need to place mental health as a political priority. And it's not political in the sense of who owns what and how it works. It is across the board. I can say every one of us, myself included, regardless of whether you're EPP or otherwise, had some impact on their mental health. And if it wasn't direct yourself, it was with a family member, be it younger or older, it was with a colleague, it was with a staff member. And the realities are, we are so interconnected. Human contact is incredibly important. And then people shifted to online. And I think in these elections, be it the Europeans last year or subsequent to that, we have to work a lot harder as a centre-right group who believe in the values of the EU to connect people again and remind them actually sitting around the table like we're doing is incredibly important for politics, but most importantly for the betterment of mental health. Yeah.
That's so insightful, and it's true that you reminded us also some things that, for example, I forgot about a physical touch, because it's true that after COVID, no one knew how to handle another person, like less than 1 meter. But we wanted to know, because some of us are wondering, what inspired you to become an advocate on mental health?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I come from a very small community in the west coast of Ireland, a village called Shrewell, about the size of the table here. And in the course of, I'm 37 now, in the course of my teenage years up to this point, in that very small community, we've lost an excessive amount of people through death by suicide. And from my teenage years, knowing a neighbour who had sadly died by suicide, and people knew about it, I knew about it, nobody wanted to talk about it, but yet it was like the elephant in the room. Yeah. And even from that teenage years, I was like, something doesn't feel right, because if this is the experience that person went through, A, how do we prevent that space? But equally, how do we talk about it? And from an Irish context too, our historical darkened legacy around mental health is a challenge. Whether you had any form of disability, any different ability, from dyslexia to a mental health acute crisis care, you were placed into a psychiatric home, and often outside of your own control or your family's control. So that's years of build-up to where then I'm going around speaking to younger people, having conversations with mates of mine, and they're like, wow, as a single mom or in a partnership, or my friendship broke down, or a paper didn't go well, or I'm figuring out my orientation, or I don't know, an opportunity didn't work out the way I had planned, because success moves in very different shapes and circles. All of that really rung true. And then ultimately, when I did get elected, you look around, yes, the economics of what we do here and the many pieces of policy and legislation impact. But if we don't have humans in the EU who put their feet on the floor every day and go out to work, study, play, and build on a European Union, then we are missing the fabric of what this union is about. So for me, that social piece, public health piece, we talk about the physical health and safety of human beings here in this house because we legislate, but why not mental mental health. So when I got elected, it only amplified the work. And as you can see, I love to talk about it.
That's lovely.
Maria, it's very inspiring to hear your story about how you deal and how you managed to went to the parliament and your implication with mental health issues. I'm very interested to know how do you politicians and other members of the European Parliament deal with the problems of mental health issues that can be related with the profession of being a politician. It's a very stressful activity with plenty of responsibilities. So I would like to know how, for example, you or the people from your party, your colleagues, deal with problems like anxiety or maybe burnout.
Yeah. I think we need a whole other episode of that because I get asked this question quite a bit when I'm speaking to younger people in particular, and this is where I wish I could say, here's a white sheet of paper of what I do, the 7 days a week, the 365 days. And actually what I've learned is I flirt very closely to burnout all the time because I don't know if it's because, I'm a young woman or because, there's only a short lifespan in this political ring that we play around in, or because I live on the most west periphery of the European Union. So you're constantly traveling. My constituency is so large that the need to always show up is a really hard thing to grapple with. And sometimes I don't look at rest like it's a food group, and I need to. So I remind myself that I'm absolutely okay to take periods of time of a Sunday off because my brain needs it in order for me to show up and do my best. Even as it's all the simple things like getting proper food in my body and not allowing my brain to trick me into saying, well, you haven't had a great day, or you've had a great day, so the treat is to do and eat X, Y, and Z. Well, actually, that's going to kick me in my derriere in a couple of days' time, so I probably shouldn't. I don't know if you could hear my phone is connected to my watch, which is never a happy thing. So my watch is constantly buzzing or my phone's constantly moving, and the disconnect of taking that time to say, right, well, I can't be creative or come up with solutions or really show up in myself in order to show up for someone else if I'm not minding myself. So that pouring from an empty vessel type mindset. But it's hard and it's a lot of trial and error. It's a lot of conversations like this. I could ask all three of you to say, like, what are your things to do? And from that I might get, all right, well, actually there's some good ideas that I can interpret it into mine. I do try, because I talk about and I legislate here in this house on mental health, to say, like, right, well, I have to lead by example in many shapes or forms, but there's days where I'm absolutely saying I was not a good advocate for mental health, and then there's other days where I'm like, actually, I showed up okay, and that's the trial and error. That is a really hard thing to say. Hence the reason why I've talked at length about not being very good at it.
Is there actually any of you with some tricks to what
do you do to
manage
mind your
your
mental
health? Yeah.
Ooh, it's very interesting. During the pandemic, I began to do more exercise. That was very interesting. But I was introduced by some friends with mindfulness, which is kind of interesting. And at the beginning, seems very ridiculous, the idea of connect with your body and your mind through respiration and to the full presence. And years after, it's an amazing technique of relaxation, of disconnecting. I try to do it several times during the week and fully recommend it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Actually, in my school, like that period of COVID, they started to do 30 minutes of mindfulness before every day of school. So anyone could join, and it was, of course, online, but it was super nice. And I was also introduced to mindfulness there, and it's super rewarding. Also, I started with yoga when I went to the States again, which is also amazing. And it's now and then like go for a run or go to the gym to disconnect, because the mind also needs to disconnect.
Yeah, it's super important that it does. What about you?
Well, actually, I don't have any technique, but I realized that when I'm close to, not burnout, because burnout is the last, but when I'm close to mental fatigue, I understood when the moment comes. And when the moment comes, I just cancel all the appointment and just stay home and relax a bit.
Yeah.
That's
But it's super important to anybody listening to, that they understand knowledge is the key to a lot of things and unlocking a lot of things. So like that, when you know you're flirting with the line of it, then you have the support systems around you to step back into it.
Yeah. And I had also another question. You mentioned that in Ireland, which is already like a country that it's not traditional, it's like it's kind of progressive compared to other countries. There was a sort of stigma, no? Some kind of we don't talk about this, we don't talk about that. Do you still think there is a lot of that in all the European countries, that we still need to fight it?
In terms of mental health?
In terms of stigma towards mental health, or
absolutely.
now like we are talking about that, so it's better than in the past?
I think it's twofold. I think you have, again, back to the generations of people who grew up in a very different European Union or a national, a member state. So I have older generations, and I think of my parents, who look at the term resilience, grit, working hard, very different to my generation, very different to yours, because, and I never like to say I'm the knower of all, but there is a happy place of coming to work or living your vocation while also gifting your time off to yourself to R&R, to relax and rest up. Older generations, I don't know if we're afforded that opportunity. So there is that imbalance, and with that comes the stigma. Also comes the generational traumas that come with. We're also seeing, from a female perspective, more and more increase of online and offline physical abuse. If you look at the LGBTI plus community, they also suffer impact. People new into our European Union suffer impact. So, I mean, collectively, then you can see why mental health has to be at the conversation table for everything we do, because while we'll never, I don't fully eradicate it, and I hope we don't, because we still need to continue work on with people. I mean, like this, 4 of us sitting here talking about mental health, and we all have, while mindfulness was shared here, you have very different techniques to mind your mental health. So we can't expect a band-aid approach or a one-size-fits-all of a hat and a jumper to do the 450 million citizens of the EU. That's even before we get into the enlargement process of 40 million potential Ukrainians coming into the EU. Sure. That will have a different type of experience around their mental health. So I think the more we understand, the more we openly talk about it, to your point, the more you see shoulders relax and say, actually, I can show up here authentically, have an honest conversation, and most importantly, learn something a little bit different about yourself or about others that are sharing the table with you.
Great. The interview is not done yet, but we are running a bit out of time, so it's time for the questions from our social media. Andres.
I would like to know a question that has been repeated several times. During the last legislature, you focus in a very particular strait of the society, the farmers, and about their mental health issues. I want to know why it's important to talk about this topic, and also I want to know what can the European Union do for them in order to take care of this problem.
Yeah, a couple of things on that question. I mean, I have to give kudos and credit to the EPP family, because we are traditionally a farmers' party. We see value in them. I mean, they put food on our tables. And when you look at what the lived experience of a farmer, be it young or seasoned, farm organisations have been saying for us for years, the financial and emotional toil that the likes of a CAP, Common Agricultural Policy, is not fit for purpose. So from the outset, that's what we're working towards as an EPP group sitting on the Agriculture Committee, because farmers need to feel appreciated. And how do we alleviate that financial pressure? Well, it's getting the money into their pockets for the food that they're creating on our dinner tables. The other is around, I work very closely with an Irish university called University College Dublin. They're doing great research into what the lived experience of a farmer is. So in their most recent report, close to 24% of farmers openly shared suicide ideation with them in a 2-week period of this report. Now, that's a terrifying sign, because you can imagine the percentage that may have not felt comfortable sharing that. But also, how do we mitigate that? Well, it's around having ring-fence funding dedicated to farmers. So I can imagine if farmers are in our life, and I speak to them quite daily, how we provide talk therapies and supports look very different to that they might of a different sector. So we also have to think about the seasons. And one part of that research from UCD was I'm sitting opposite a farmer, we're going through some of the traumas he or she is experiencing, and we're trying to use meditation or mindfulness. And you're talking about a leaf falling down onto the river and going down like your worries going with them. But interestingly, when you share that with farmers, their immediate from their focus group, their immediate response was, hang on, if a leaf is falling, that means it's a different type of season and I should have the cows out, or I should have sheep out, or actually the tillage is going wrong and the shed's not clean. And it creates an anxiety without even knowing. So the tools and the methodologies that we use also have to be supported differently. So within that, then you have a different ring fix funding and policy you have. But ultimately, it's very clear, we got to stop flip-flopping the ping pong game, or as I say, changing the goalposts for farmers. And I particularly think about young farmers and that generation renewal. If we consistently change their sector every couple of years in a mandate to say this is an option, this is a requirement, this is not, then no wonder emotional financial distress is going to come on them. So they need clarity, and that's where the EPP really shines of that clear message.
Thank you very much. I would say it's time for our last game.
This makes me nervous.
Yeah. You should be. Because you will need to pass the YEPP test.
Oh, great.
Which is a set of questions with a set of political statements to which you will need to answer yes or no if you agree with them or not. And for any question that are not, for any answer that is not in line with YEPP, I will press the buzz. Adriana, the
Can I ask the ramifications of this mean, do I get a letter from the chairman, Weber, to say, unfortunately, you did not pass the test? I'm like beginning to start sweating now.
Maybe from Lydia Pereira.
Okay, you ready?
Yes.
Do you support every member state spending 3% of GDP on defense?
Yes.
Okay. Do you support having a lower income tax rate for people aged 18 to 35?
Interesting. Absolutely, yes. Yeah.
Okay. Do you support qualified majority voting on foreign and security policy at the European Council?
Qualified majority?
Yes.
Yeah, I'll take that one. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Do you support the
I gotta say no to one of these to keep my credit. Yeah, sorry.
Do you support the ban of tobacco snus across Europe?
Say that again to me.
Do you support the ban of tobacco snus across Europe?
Yes, I do support that ban.
Okay.
You guys agree?
No, we do not support the ban. No.
You want to keep it?
Yeah, like we are liberals. Like
Yeah.
we like free market. So yeah.
I failed. I failed.
But it was just.
But I'm
one.
okay failing on that one, actually. That's okay.
Okay, just a couple of more.
Yeah.
Do you support suspending Hungary's voting rights at the European Council?
Yes.
Okay. And do you support an independent European nuclear deterrent?
See, from an Irish perspective, and nuclear, it doesn't fit well. So I'll say no on that one. Yeah.
But
Do I support
wait.
a better Europeans' better mental health? Yes, I
Yay! So with how much? 4 out of 6 questions, you passed the YEPP test. Thank you very much, Maria Walsh. It was a very interesting conversation, and thank you for all your work in the EPP Group and in the Parliament on Mental Health.
Can I just say thanks very much for the conversation? I learned a lot. And then actually thank you genuinely for putting mental health on the table for our family.
Any final message you want to leave to our listeners?
No, I think, listen, in the context of mental health, first and foremost, we need to see more and more people be represented in our community about issues like mental health. That's so important. I think when you look at the work that you guys are doing in this conversation, it's incredibly important that we're also a part of removing the stigma and discrimination and talking about things of, yes, there's not maybe a direct path for all member states around supporting people's mental health, but what are the shared practices that we can do across the 27 member states and growing? And anybody watching, listening, know you are valued, you are seen, and you are heard. And just mind yourselves.
Thank you again very much, and thank you very much, Adriana. Thank you very much, Andres, for your support, and thank you to our listeners. And see you to our next episode.
You've been listening to the YEPP Show. Thank you for joining us today, and make sure to follow us on our social media.